Walt Disney was a young animator who was actually struggling to find his way in this new industry until he created his famous character that opened up lots of opportunity for him, Mickey Mouse. Then he had the vision to build Disney Studios and all the other characters. And then he had a dream about creating a family theme park around all of these Disney animated characters, a place called Disneyland. And ultimately, he was the one that had the vision for, even though he never saw it built, Disney World in Florida. Mike Vance, who was an employee of Walt Disney and a former dean of Disney University, tells a story from Walt's last couple of weeks of his life when he was in the hospital up in Los Angeles. There was a reporter, here's how the story goes, that was desperate to interview Walt and see him in the hospital one last time. And eventually Walt said okay, and so the reporter comes in to the hospital room on that day, and at this point from surgery, Walt Disney is so weak he can't even sit up in the bed. He can't speak above a whisper. And so he invites the reporter to lay right down in the bed next to him. And for the next 30 minutes, the reporter interviews Walt Disney with his ear just within earshot, of his mouth. And for 30 minutes, when Walt hardly has any energy, he starts telling him about this new park that they bought all this land for in Florida, and he begins to describe. He's pointing at the ceiling. There's nothing on the ceiling, but in Walt's mind, Walt sees the vision for the map of what would be Disney World. And he's going, right here, we're going to put restaurants, and here's going to be an attraction, and here's what's going to happen here. And then after about 30 minutes of this, the reporter leaves, and sadly, just a few days later, Walt Disney dies. Well, it wasn't until 6 years later that Disney World was actually finished and opened. And on that first day of completion and celebration of Walt Disney World, someone said to Mike Vance, "Isn't it too bad that Walt Disney didn't live to see all of this?" And Vance replied, "He did see it. That's why it's here." You see, Walt Disney was a man of vision, and he saw many of his dreams come to fruition and reality. And probably most of us in Southern California have experienced that reality a time or two. Today, we're starting a brand new series, our summer series, where we're going to be looking at one person in their life through Scripture, and it is a person, a young man, who had dreams and visions about his life and the future. We're going to look at someone in the Bible by the name of Joseph. Now, Joseph's story, if you don't know it, is found in the first book of the Bible, which is Genesis. And here's something that's pretty remarkable. 25% of the book of Genesis is given to Joseph's life and story. I mean, he gets more airtime than creation. Creation's just 2 chapters. Joseph's like 14 chapters. Joseph gets more airtime than Noah, if you ever heard that story, and the big ark. That's only 4 chapters. In fact, Noah gets more airtime than his great-grandfather, Abraham, his grandfather, Isaac, and his dad, Jacob, all combined. So why is so much space in the Genesis story devoted to Joseph's story? Here's why. Because I think from the time Joseph had his first dreams and visions, which were actually from God, about what would be true in his life someday, before he got to the fulfillment of those dreams and visions, he had a lot of setbacks and ups and downs in his story. There's a lot of family drama in Joseph's story. There's a lot of setbacks. But the overarching thing that I think you're going to see if you'll journey with us over the next 7 weeks as we go through the story of Joseph for the summer, or I invite you, read it on your own. We're going to start today in chapter 37 is where it begins. And if you're going to be gone a week or two over the summer, watch online. You could read the story on your own as we go through it. But here's what you're going to see in his story. And I want to give you the big idea right up front today, okay? So what is it that we're going to see in Joseph's story over the next 7 weeks? Here's what we're going to see. If you're taking notes, you can write this down. God was in both the steps and the stops of Joseph's life. God was in both the steps, the advances, the good things, and he was in the stops. He was in the pauses. He was in the letdowns. He was in the setbacks. God was in all of it. And I think there's so many chapters and pages of the Bible dedicated to Joseph's story because we can all find a little bit of ourselves and our story in his. Because I think all of us have had dreams and visions for our life. We've had desires and goals as a person, in our career, maybe as a family, even our faith, how we think it will go, only to experience letdowns and setbacks. And what I believe God wants us to see in Joseph's story is that God was with Joseph through all of it, through the steps and the stops, the ups and the downs. And what you're going to see is that Joseph trusted God no matter what came his way. You're going to see that in Joseph's story, we have no record that he ever asked why. When bad things happened to him, his response was never really why. It was always, well, what's next? Like, if this is the reality I'm in now, okay, I'm going to trust God for what's next in the situation that I find myself in. And so I pray that this series builds the same kind of faith and response in us when we have our own letdowns and setbacks. So let's begin with Joseph's story. It is found in Genesis chapter 37. We're going to read a few verses, then I'll talk about it, explain it, make a point, read a few verses. If you're new to our church, that's how it's going to go. So let's look at verse 37, and when you see a bold word in the scripture verse, just say it out loud with me. Here we go. Here's what we learn about Joseph from the very beginning. Joseph, a young man of 17. He's just 17 years old. He was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bela and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a what? Bad report about them. Two things we learn about Joseph at the very, very beginning. First of all, he's a young man. He's only 17 years old. He's the youngest brother of a bunch of older brothers. The second thing we learn about him is he's a tattletale. Did you catch that? Like, he comes back to daddy, and what does he do? He talks bad about his older brothers. And these older brothers weren't just like 19, 20. Like, these older brothers, if you read the previous chapters, he's the youngest, they were men. I mean, several of them had families. Like, they had gone to war. Like, these guys were in their 30s, 40s. Like, these are men. And what is he doing, right? He's not helping himself win his older brothers over by going back and talking bad about his brothers. But what this is also revealing is a little character issue and lack of maturity on Joseph's part. Because if you're someone who has to bring others down, whether that be in your family or at your place of work, right, or in a friend group, the reason people put others down, it's almost always comes from a unhealthy place of trying to make yourself look better. You want them to look bad, so you look better. And this is exactly what Joseph was doing. And sadly, this way of acting for Joseph comes from the environment that his own dad created in their family. Let's keep reading, verse 3 and 4. It says, now Israel, pause right there, something you need to know in this story. Israel is Jacob's new name that God gave him. So sometimes when you're reading the story, it says Jacob, sometimes it says Israel. That's the same person. And if you're wondering, why did he get a different name? If you just read back a couple of chapters, Jacob, scripture tells us he got in this wrestling match with a divine being. We don't know if it was the archangel Michael or Jesus or God himself, but he gets in this wrestling match with a divine being. And after that, it's a crazy story in Genesis. God says, hey, from now on, I'm going to call you Israel. So every time you see Israel, it's Jacob. Everybody got it? Okay, otherwise when you read, you're like, where did this guy come in the story? Because they go back and forth between the two names. All right, now, Israel, which is Jacob, that's Joseph's father, he loved Joseph, say it out loud, more. He loved him more than any of his other sons because he had been born to him in his old age. And he made an ornate robe for him. Pause right there. This is where the idea of a coat of many colors, Or if you've ever, the famous Broadway show, Joseph and the what? Anybody? Technicolor Dreamcoat, right? That's where it comes. We don't know exactly what the coat was like, but in other words, his dad loved him the most, and he gave him something special that Joseph proudly wore. But here was the problem with him doing that. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him. They hated him, so much so they could not speak a kind word to him. If you think your family's jacked up, this one's worse. Like, we're just getting into it. And the truth is, this family's problem of showing favoritism, it goes way back. Joseph was his dad's favorite. Here's why. It says, well, because, he wasn't expecting any more kids in his old age. He was like the surprise baby, right? It was like, oh, I think we're done having kids. It's like, well, no, we're not. But it also, what does it say here? It says that, well, what it doesn't tell us is that it's actually another reason he's his favorite is because Joseph is from his favorite wife, which is Rachel. Which, by the way, if you have to choose who your favorite wife is, you already got problems, dude. All right? He's got some serious problems going. And these problems actually go back multiple generations. Joseph's great-grandfather is Abraham. And if you know Abraham's story, let me tell it to you. There was some family drama all the way back 3 generations ago. God goes to Abraham and says, hey, I'm going to make a covenant, a promise with you. And from you, your descendants are going to be like the stars. And I'm going to bless you and your family and your household for generations. And I'm going to bless you above all other peoples. Like, this is the promise God made with Abraham. There was only one problem. Abraham and Sarah were old and they didn't have any kids. And so they're like, how's this going to happen? And they never saw it happen. And so they didn't trust God's timing. And so Sarah takes one of her servants, Hagar, gives Hagar to her husband to sleep with so maybe that she could get pregnant and they could maybe have a child through her. Well, sure enough, he sleeps with Hagar, she gets pregnant, and they have a son, Ishmael. The problem is, that was never God's intent. God's intent was that Sarah would have a child. And eventually, she did. She had a son, Isaac. And now, the family drama between these 2 women and these 2 sons, and there was like favoritism, and Sarah couldn't take it anymore. And so she sent Hagar and her son away so that her and Isaac could have Abraham to himself. It just got like a novella up in here. Did you feel it? You're like, whoa, who's sleeping with who? And now who has a kid? And they have a kid, and now they're related? Like, whoa, like that's what's happening in this family, right? So now Isaac is Joseph's grandfather, and we know like the favoritism in that family, right? If you want to read about it, it's over in Genesis chapter 27. Joseph's grandfather Isaac had 2 sons that famously fought for the blessing and inheritance from their father. And his own dad is named Jacob, which means deceiver, because this is Jacob and Esau's story. His own dad deceived his father into acting like his brother so he could get the family inheritance. Then Jacob himself is deceived by his father-in-law to get Rachel, which is Jacob's mom. And his father-in-law says, yes, you can marry my daughter if you work for me for 7 years. And then after 7 years, this is a wild story. If your father-in-law did this to you, let me know what you think. After 7 years, like at the reception, the wedding reception, apparently Joseph, probably drinking a little too much. And after the wedding night, he wakes up and realizes that's not Rachel. It was the other sister, Leah. And he goes back to the father-in-law and he's like, hey, dude, this isn't the one we agreed on. And he goes, well, you can marry that one too, but you got to work for me another 7 years. 14 years. And then he eventually gets Rachel. This is Joseph's family. They are jacked up, right? There's some serious family drama happening throughout this story. And here's an important caution that I think is rarely ever talked about in this story. And if you're taking notes, here's kind of the first lesson of the first caution. Unresolved family issues impact the next generations. Unresolved family issues impact the next generation. Some of us know that all too well in our own families. You see, the truth is Joseph is just running with the reality that his dad created for him. His dad is the one that created this unhealthy environment with the brothers by letting everyone know he has a favorite. Mom and dad, you might have a favorite, you just got to keep it a secret, right? And he gives him a special coat, makes all the other brothers hate him. And this idea of playing favorites, it got passed on from generation to generation to generation. And now it's just the reality that Joseph is living in. Dads, this is why your leadership in the home and your leadership when it comes to faith is so important. Because so much of what gets picked up and passed on in families comes from fathers. This is why next week we're going to pause our Joseph series for 1 week, and we're just going to have a special Father's Day service and message. And I'm going to give a special message on Father's Day and talk about how do we create a legacy of faith in our family where we pass on and pray for the right things to be passed on from generation to generation. So here's my quick question and challenge on this point in the story before we move on. What are the unresolved or undealt with issues in your family? That's a hard one to really honestly look at. I mean, what are the things that everybody feels and everybody knows, but no one's allowed to say, or no one's allowed to talk about, or no one's allowed to deal with? And if you can think of one or two of those, here's what I would encourage you to do. Don't ignore them any longer because they don't get better. Let this story be a reminder they actually get passed on. And what you're going to see is, in this case for Joseph, they got worse, which is usually what happens. So what's the alternative? The alternative is to address them, to get some help from a professional counselor, to let God heal them in you, and then move forward in your family from wherever you are, from whatever legacy you were given, and decide as a man and a woman of faith, we're going to start a new legacy. In many ways, I've told you before, this is what my parents both did for me and my sister. My parents didn't come from families that were always Jesus followers. And there were a lot of things in our family story that were not healthy, that were not good, that were being passed on. And thankfully, my mom and my dad found Jesus. Jesus found them. And they decided, you know what, let's do things different in our family. And because of that, in many ways, my sister and I feel like we started on life on third base. Because there were things that my parents dealt with and overcame that didn't get passed to us, that honestly, for generations in our family, men had struggled with alcohol and abused alcohol. And my dad and his brothers broke that in many ways in our family. And so you can be the one to do that in yours. Now, let's get back to Joseph's story. So Joseph is still young. He's the favorite with a special coat from dad. His brothers hate him, and now he does something to make them hate him more. He gets a dream, and look what he does. Look at this, verses 5-8. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him. Say it out loud. All the more. It's not getting better, all right? He said to them, listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright while your sheaves gathered around mine and did what? Bowed down to it. His older brothers are like, do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us? And they hated him all the more because of what? His dream and what he said. Joseph is not helping himself very much here, is he? Right? I mean, he's just digging himself a deeper and deeper hole. And as you'll see in a few moments, his brothers are going to throw him in it. That's coming in just a second. If you read the whole chapter, actually what happens to Joseph, he gets two dreams. So think about how low of an EQ this 17-year-old has. He has one dream, he tells it to his brothers, and they're so mad. Right? Because in a patriarchal, everything is about the oldest sibling and the oldest male. And now you have the youngest one going, you're all going to bow down and serve me. And they're like, oh no, we ain't going to do that. And so he has one dream, and if you read the whole story, he actually has a second dream. The first one was about agriculture. The second one was about astronomy, stars and moon and sun. But the point of both dreams is the exact same. Everyone in the dream bows down, and everything in the dream bows down to him. And guess what he does with the second dream? He doesn't keep it to himself. He tells everyone again. And they hate him all the more again. Now, here's the reality. Joseph is not wrong about these dreams. These two dreams about everyone bowing down to him, they were actually from God, and they were about Joseph's future and God's plan for his life. But man, does this kid lack some EQ, right? Like he's just not reading the room here. God might give you that dream, but the way you say it and when you say it and who you say it to ain't working for you. So here's the next lesson in this part of the story. Write this down if you're taking notes. Joseph had the right message, but not the right maturity. He had the right message, but not the right maturity. How many of you know you can have the right message, but you can say it in the wrong way at the wrong time? Right? Some of you husbands and wives were like, yep, that's what you do all the time. Right? What you said is true, but when you chose to say it, woof, that's what got you in trouble. Right? Some of your kids, what they said is true. How they said it is what got them in trouble. Or you could have the right timing and you could have the right maturity, but you could have the wrong message. My family and I ran across a guy at PB on Friday who had both the wrong message and the wrong maturity. It has been amazing weather this last week. It actually feels like summer. And so we decided as a family on Friday on my day off, I was like, man, let's go to the beach. Actually, my wife's idea. So we went to the beach and we went to PB, found a great little spot kind of by the pier over there. And we were out there for a few hours with our 3 kids and just having fun and hanging out at the beach. And after a few hours, we were just starting to pack up because when I go to the beach, I have to have stuff. I know you look at me and say, man, look at that amazing tan that white guy has. No, it just turns red and then goes back to freckles, right? So when I go to the beach, I got to have stuff. Like I got to have an umbrella. I got to have all the things, right? So we're starting to pack up all of the stuff. And I noticed there's a guy just working his way through every group at the beach. And he's walking up to everybody with a little sign and he's asking for something. And this dude looks pretty rough and pretty weathered. And he's just literally going to each spot asking, and they're all saying no. And then I'm like, he's going to get to us before we leave. And I'm like, he's probably asking for money. Sure enough, he walks up before we're done packing. And here's what he says. He looks at us and says, hey, do you guys have any free marijuana? And actually, because I thought he was going to ask for money, it gave me pause, which I think gave him hope. Because everybody else had just obviously said no, but I kind of paused and he thought, oh, yeah, and he kind of leaned in. And so then real quick, I recovered and I was like, no. But Pastor Mike is down there by Tower 26. And I think he might have some. I didn't say the second part, okay? But I did say, I did pull myself together and said no. Now, the guy at the beach, he had a wrong message and the wrong maturity. Joseph had the right message, but not the maturity to know when to say it or how to share it. And I think this is an important lesson for all Jesus-following Christians to hear. Being a child of God and having the truth of God does not give you permission to be rude or to be a jerk. You can know the truths of God, you can be right about something, but you can share that truth in a way that turns people off. And sadly, this is what many Christians are known for in our culture. That yes, what you're saying is true, but how you're saying it and when you're saying it makes it not received. Let me give you an example of this from like something that happened recently. Let's just say your friend is a San Antonio Spurs fan. And they just lost the NBA Finals last night. And so you come up to them today and you go, man, your Spurs really tanked those last 2 games in the fourth quarter. Just like your life will be without Jesus, friend. Right? Like, both those things might be true. But that is not going to be well received because it's the right message, it's the wrong time. When you're sharing the good news of Jesus, here's the first clue. You ready? How do you share it? Make it good news. That's how you share the good news of Jesus. You make it good news. You use good timing. You share it with people who already like you and respect you. Let's get back to Joseph's story, okay? So his brothers hate him because of the coat, and he's the favored special son. And now they really hate him because he's like, someday you're all gonna bow down to me. And so, his dad sends the brothers out again on the family business, which, by the way, their family business was big. They were some of the most wealthy people in that part of the world at this time. They had numerous herds of animals, wealthy family. And so Joseph, though, was always kind of like daddy's boy that would stay back home, and the older brothers would go out. And so the dad would use him to go check on the older brothers, which, again, how is that going to make Joseph be, his brothers respect him? And so dad does it again. He's like, hey, go out and tell me how your brothers are doing. And look at what happens when they see him coming. Look at this. Verse 17, so Joseph went after his brothers, and he found them near Dothan. But they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to do what? Say it out loud. Kill him. They hated him so much. They despised him so much for both the environment his dad created and, honestly, the immaturity and pride that Joseph had in that position. They wanted to kill him. Here comes the dreamer, they said to each other. Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns. It's like a really deep well in the Middle East to catch water because it doesn't rain much. And let's say a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams. Now, when you read this story in its entirety, you see that one of his brothers, actually the oldest brother, Reuben, he actually kind of halfway stands up for him. Because they literally just want to kill him first and then throw him in there. And Reuben goes, hey, let's not kill him. Let's just throw him in there. And, he'll eventually starve. He'll, get dehydrated and die. But then, he was basically trying to go like, if we kill him, that's bad. If we just throw him in there and leave him, it's not as bad. Really? I think they're both equally bad. He's going to die one way or the other. But isn't this how we justify bad behavior? Well, this bad behavior is not as bad as that bad behavior. That's what Reuben was doing. He's like, and then it tells us that Reuben actually had it in the back of his mind, maybe I'll come back after all the brothers leave and I'll like rescue him and just be like, dude, don't ever come home. So he's the nice brother, right? And then look at what they did. Verse 37. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, right? The thing that he kind of so proud, look at me, dad loves me more than you, nanny, nanny, boo, boo, right? That's what he's doing. They took that off him, and they took him, and what? Threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty, and there was no water in it. So think about what just happened to Joseph. Joseph shows up thinking he's somebody special. He's had this privileged position in his house. He wore it every day and put it in everyone's face. He had these incredible dreams and visions from God. But now he's been betrayed by his own family and thrown in a pit. Where is God in this, and what could God possibly be doing? Here's what God was doing. God was stripping Joseph of his pretense and his pride so that his character could grow. This way, when his dreams would become a reality, because I'm going to give you a little, let me ruin the story for you. In 22 years, his dream and vision of his brothers bowing down to him actually happens. We will get there in week 7. But at 17, Joseph didn't have the character to be able to handle that moment well. And so what God had to do was strip him of his pretense and pride, so when that moment came, he could be trusted with it. Here's the lesson in this part of the story. Write it down if you're taking notes. The pit isn't the end, it's the messy middle. The pit isn't the end. Right? Joseph gets thrown in the pit. He's like, this is it. I'm going to die. It's all over. I'm going to show you in just a moment. It wasn't over. It was actually the messy middle. It was the messy middle. Now, in our culture, we all love the dramatic before and afters. right? There's entire television channels and industries dedicated to the before and the after. We love the yard before and the yard after, right? The renovation. Ooh, look how much nicer that is, right? We love the house before and the house after. Or we like the car before and the car after. Ooh, look how dramatic that is. Or how about this guy before? That's me, 1979, baby. And now this guy after. It's not getting better, is it? It's getting worse. And so are you. So there, okay? Most of us, we love the before and after, but you know what we don't post pictures of? The messy middle. Right? We all want to post pictures of, ooh, look at the kitchen after it was done. But I'll tell you what had to happen before it got better, it got worse. Right? If you've ever done a renovation, you know this. It was old and you didn't like it, but then it got worse. You couldn't cook. There was like dust all over the house. Like, the carpet was all ripped up. Like if you did a yard project, they had to dig trenches for everything. There's more dirt. It's worse before it gets better. There is almost always pain in the process of growth. But here's what you need to know. Joseph's dream didn't end in the pit, but it was where his character started to be refined. God needed Joseph to let go of his coat so that he could embrace his calling with the right character to be able to handle it. And so here's my question to you. What if you looked at that bad thing in your life right now? That betrayal, that hurt, that suffering, not as punishment from God, but actually preparation for God. What if you decided to see a setback as maybe God is trying to set something else up? This is what God was doing for Joseph. He was setting things up. He was working for Joseph's good, even in the bad that his brothers did for him. So let's go back to the story, and I want to end it and give you a final thought to finish on. All right, so Joseph is in the pit. Some of the brothers wanted to kill him. One of the brothers said, maybe we should just let him die in there. They're not sure what to do. So here's what it says, that Joseph's in the pit. The brothers sit down to have a meal, and they see in the distance a caravan of traders on their way to Egypt. And they go, oh, you know what? Like, caravan of traders on Egypt. And then the next youngest brother, Judah, speaks up. He goes, let's not just leave him in here to die. What do we get from that? Let's sell him to these traders, and they'll take him to Egypt, make him a slave. We'll never see him again, and we'll get paid. And they all go, this is a good plan. And that's what they do. They sell him to these traders to be taken to Egypt and sold as a slave, and they get 20 shekels of silver for it. But still, there's one problem. What do you tell dad when you go home? And he's like, hey, where's Joseph? And you're like, who? I don't know, he never made it. So what do you tell dad? And here's what they did. Look at this, verse 31. Then they, all the older brothers, they got Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, dipped the robe in blood. They took the ornate robe back to their father. Man, how messed up is this? Again, there's hope for your family. I promise it's not as bad as this one, right? There's hope for my family. It's not as this bad. They took the bloody robe back to their father and said, we found this. Examine it and tell us if it's your son's robe. And of course, the dad recognized it and said, it is my son's robe. Some ferocious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces. Then Jacob, the dad, tore his clothes, put on sackcloth. This is what they did in their culture when they were in grief and mourning. And he mourned for his son for many days. Pause right there. I mean, think how messed up this is. First of all, you're going to kill your brother. Then you're like, slightly better. Let's sell him into slavery. We're not that bad of guys, right? And then I think the worst thing they did, because this is what you always have to do when you make bad, sinful choices, and you don't own it and you don't confess it, what do you got to do? You got to tell another lie, or you got to commit another sin to cover the sin you already did, right? This is what we all do. And this is what they did. And they let their own dad believe that his son was killed. when in fact he wasn't. And so now, at the end of chapter 37, everyone in the family thinks Joseph is dead. The brothers know he's not dead, but they think, we'll never see this guy again. He's all the way in Egypt. We're never going to see him. And then I want you to see the very first word of the last verse of chapter 37. It's bold on the screen. Say it out loud. Meanwhile. Say it again. Meanwhile. Meanwhile, when everyone else thinks he's dead, the Midianites sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. Here's our final thought for today. If you're taking notes, write this in there. When everyone believed the story was over, God was already writing the next chapter. When everyone believed the story was over, he's dead, or we got rid of him, we'll never see him again. Meanwhile, that one word tells us so much about how God works. While we are doubting because of our circumstances, meanwhile, God is writing the next chapter. While we are hurting and in pain and suffering because of what's going on in our life, meanwhile, God is still working. And so if you are here today and you feel like your story is over in your marriage or in a relationship with one of your children, or financially you feel like it's all over, it's done, or maybe because of a sin or a choice that you made, you feel like even between you and God, it's over. Meanwhile, God is still writing your story. You see, what felt like a step back for Joseph, he went from favored son to slave in Egypt. It wasn't a step back, it was actually a setup. It was the first step towards ultimately him seeing those dreams and visions fulfilled. But he's going to have a lot of stops, a lot of trouble along the 22 years to get there. And we're going to go through 22 years in 7 weeks. Will you stand with me? Everybody outside as well on the patio. I'm going to invite the worship team. They're going to come back out. They're going to lead us in one song. And here's how I wanted to end. As I was thinking about this message and ending the service today, here's the invitation that I want to give. I want to pray for everybody who feels like their life might be in a pit like Joseph, so to speak. What I mean by that is Joseph ended up in a place that he never thought he would be. And maybe you're here today and you've ended up in a place in your life, in your marriage, in a friendship, in your career, where you go, oh, I didn't think I'd be here. I didn't think I would have lost my job this year. I didn't think we'd be under this stress this year. I didn't think the relationship would feel this fragile after this many years. And maybe you feel like you're in a place where you didn't expect to be. Here's my invitation for you. Would you choose today that even though you don't see it or understand it, to believe that God has a meanwhile for you? Meaning that he is writing a next chapter for you. And you don't understand it yet. You don't see a way out of it yet. But rather than just give up on God or give up on that relationship, would you believe there's a meanwhile for you? Meanwhile, God is at work. He's writing the next chapter. It's not over yet. Let's pray together. Lord, for every single one of us today that feel like we're in that space, God, would you fill us with hope? Would you help us to believe even in the difficult spaces and places and seasons and moments of life where it doesn't seem like we're going up, it's not going forward, but we feel like we've taken a step back? Would we be able to be like Joseph and trust you in whatever space we find ourselves today? That you're writing the next chapter, that our story is not over, that truly the best is yet to come. And so God, give us perseverance, give us faith to believe, give us endurance. Help us to be people that surround ourselves with community that encourages us and prays for us and lifts us up so that we know we're not alone, so that we know it's not over. And so God, help us believe that today. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.